So just like we did with the 1660 Ti launch, we have got ourselves one of them custom fandangled special edition cards that come with all the bells and whistles. And then we've also got ourselves an MSRP card, which is right here on the actual test bench. So in terms of pricing, there's obviously a little bit of a differential here. We'll talk about that, whether or not the extra horsepower or features are worth it. And then we're also going to talk about the extremely crowded product stack that has kind of been Nvidia's forte for the last several years. EVGA offers a full range of components including video cards, motherboards, power supplies, cases, and peripherals. Regardless of your needs, EVGA is sure to have you covered. To see what EVGA can do for your next build, head to evga.com. So the last time we took a look at a whole new family of graphics cards was obviously the Pascal. And there was a card that was sort of slid in the mix there because of some competition that was taking place between AMD and Nvidia, especially with the Polaris cards, their height of popularity, the RX 480, and then the 570, 580, and then the 590, which came out late last year. Let's talk about the Nvidia Stack. So it basically went 1050, if you don't count the GT 1030, which a lot of people argue, it's a gaming card, you can game on that. Besides the point, the GTX 1050, we had the 1050 Ti, we had the 1060, 3 gig, the 1060, 6 gig, and then we had, of course, the 1070, 1070 Ti, 1080, 1080 Ti, and then the Titan X. And so we've kind of, those other cards, like the 1070 Ti, that slid in the stack because of the RX Vega, or the Vega 56. And then you had the 1063G slid in there because of what the RX 560 and 570 were doing at that price point. And so they made like these stopgap cards where in the lower end, from entry level to mid-range, you kind of had a card like every $50, which made it extremely difficult to choose, especially for a newbie who's looking at specs and going, well, which one do I get? There's a lot of cards that occupy this price point. Now in the past that existed because Nvidia was sort of adding cards to the family later on, whereas what's making Turing interesting is they're launching it this way. So for instance, we've now got a 1660 and a 1660 Ti. So the 1660 is designed to compete directly with the 1063 3 gig, not to be confused with the 1066 gig, because although they use the same name, 1060, there was no Ti or anything like that, just 1060, 1060, 3 gig, 6 gig. There was a lot of complaint from people like myself and the community as a whole because it was misleading in that it wasn't truly a 1060 because it had shaved SMs, it had shaved CUDA cores, and it had less memory, making it truly an entirely different card. Well, at least this time they've sort of changed the name up slightly with the Ti and non-Ti version. All right, so the 1063 gig is kind of what we're comparing here to the 1660 non-Ti. So we have 9 SMs found in the 1060 versus 22 in the 1660, so that's obviously a huge jump. A lot more CUDA cores as well, so 1152 in the 1063 gig versus the 1408 found in the 1660. So we have more SMs, we have more CUDA cores. The base clock is improved as well, so we have 1506 versus a 1530, and 1708 versus a 1785. Now if we compare the 1660 to the Ti, it's only slightly shaved, so there's 2 less SMs at 22 versus 24. There's not that many less CUDA cores. There's 1408 versus 1536, so obviously it's much closer to the 1660 Ti in terms of what's shaved versus the 1063 gig. So you're gonna see obviously a huge jump there. We're not gonna go through all the specs, but it is obviously a very big jump versus the 1063 gig. Now with that also is a little bit increased price because the 1063G also came in at under $200 when it launched. So you are getting a lot more for your money, but that kind of leads us into the argument of value, which can be a little bit convoluted. Now, although Nvidia is comparing this card to the 1063 gig, we're gonna do things a little bit differently here. We're gonna kind of talk about 2019 pricing and where it stacks up today with the current price model. It's obvious that this is gonna be an improvement and an upgrade for anyone running a 1063 gig or older, a 9 series, 7 series, whatever. The older the card is, obviously the better value this is gonna be in terms of improvement. But the discussion comes whether or not you should buy this card or save a little more or whatever. So let's go ahead and take a look at the benchmarks. And we compared it to the 1660 Ti so you can see how far it trails. And we're gonna compare it to the 1066 gig because the 3 gig is a card that should have never existed and no one should have ever bought in the first place. So as you would expect, it obviously performs extremely well at its price point, and we looked at a couple of the benchmarks of the old 3G testings. We didn't go through and retest a 1060 3G. Like I said, we were more interested in how it compares to a 1066 gig, and it's better than a 1066 gig, which obviously shows you if this is closer to a 1066 gig, then the 1660 Ti was obviously that much farther ahead. So it's an amazing card given its price point, but if you look at the launch pricing between like the 1063G and the 1066G, it's obviously slid up a few bucks, and that's kind of been the trend lately, and that's what's made a lot of people upset. But we have reached a point where we can get nearly 100 FPS in a lot of titles with a card at the $219 price point. Now this particular card, the MSI Gaming X, the 1660 Gaming X, comes in at $249. That is $30 less than the 1660 Ti. Or the EVGA version, which looks absolutely identical, and every single aspect of this card is identical to the Ti version, is $219.99 versus $249. So it's $30 less than this one. So it's like a jump of 30 and then another jump of 30. So the problem here now is when we had cards that occupied this $50 range in the past, now we've kind of had these cards squeezing together in the $30 spectrum with cards in between, because EVGA also has a $229 and a $239 model, and obviously MSI has its lower models and stuff. But we did this because we wanted to see kind of how the custom card, well, they're all custom actually, there's no Founders Edition card with either of these, same with the Ti version. This card here gives you obviously a nice brushed metal backplate. There's no backplate found on the EVGA card. This is a dual slot, dual fan, where that's a single fan, triple slot, similar to the Ti, actually identical to that, like I said. So you have to start asking yourself, is it worth having some of the extra shiny bits or the couple of FPS faster? Now, I'm the kind of person that was subscribed to, I would rather have the Founders Reference MSRP card and overclock that. Because as we found with our overclocking of the 1660 Ti, if you guys haven't seen that, go and check it out. We were able to surpass even the Strix card with just a little bit of an overclock because the cooler was clearly able to handle it. So this was only a couple of FPS faster in the test, not $30 faster, if that makes sense. If you take the performance increase of this and the price percentage difference here, obviously it was a poor value in terms of an MSRP card. But that's why you have to ask yourself, what is it that you want? Not a lot of people want a triple slot card like this. So there's a lot of different options out there, and you just have to shop around and see which are worth it. But that brings us to the next question. Should we just save the 30 bucks, add it to this card, and then buy a 1660 Ti? The answer would then be yes. But as we found with the 1660 Ti, should we just take another $40 or $50, save it, and buy a 2060? And the answer is yes. But at that point, now you're almost $100 more than the MSRP card here. But another way you can look at the financial aspect of this is if you're buying just a graphics card and you want 30 extra bucks in your pocket, then you can do that. But if you're building a system and you've got to stretch your money as far as you can go, and you've got a hard cap, you've got a hard limit, you can't stretch that ceiling, that is what it is. You don't have an extra dollar to your name. Then the 30 bucks you save on going to the MSRP model could mean the difference of getting a better component somewhere else. Maybe a little bit better memory, maybe a little bit better speed memory, possibly even adding an SSD, like we used the inland SSD, which is, the jury's still out on whether or not that's long-term friendly. But it was one of those things where we've been using it and we did some testing and everything was great with it. And so it's one of those things where you can potentially shuffle money around in the budget. And the money you save here could go somewhere else and give you a better overall build. I can tell you when it comes to my methodology and the way I shop and my mentality of that, is I usually just go for the MSRP cards anyway, as long as they are not taking away features that I need. For instance, if it was a crappy cooler and the card ran way too hot and it was way too noisy, then maybe the extra dollars would be worth the acoustics and the temperature difference. I can tell you right now, neither of these cards made any noise whatsoever under testing. Typically, you could touch a backplate or the back of the bare PCB while the test is running and feel like you're nearly burning yourself. Neither was the case with either of these cards because their coolers are extremely robust versus the amount of TDP and heat that these cards are generating, because the Turing architecture, although a smaller process, is not that hot once there's only 1,500 or so CUDA cores in there versus the 4,000 some odd found in the higher cards. So cooling and acoustics are typically not going to be a problem on either of these cards, even if you're overclocking them on the factory fan curve. Both these cards sat in the low 60s in temperatures. I mean, there's nothing to really talk about in terms of comparison. The cooler didn't make a difference on either of these cards. Just the BIOS in them boost the MSI card just a few megahertz higher, which is what get us 1 or 2 FPS increase. So at the end of the day, yes, it is way faster than the 3G and even still marginally faster than the 6 gig, meaning you may not need to upgrade. If you're running a 1060 6 gig, this wouldn't necessarily be the card for you, the Ti would, and then you have to determine whether or not that extra pricing is worth it for you. But in some titles, this base model 1660 was even matching and beating our 980 classified when we just kind of looked at our charts for the heck of it. So anyway, you guys sound off in the comments below. We had this discussion in our previous video with the Ti, and I'm curious as to how you guys look at this. Would you rather save a few extra bucks and one extra paycheck or whatever you have to do to get the next tier up in the same family? What I mean by that is, would you rather get a custom card versus the MSRP? Or would you rather save the money and get the next step up entirely when it comes to the next tier graphics card? I think there's a lot of differing opinions on this, and some people make valid points on both sides of the fence. So I'd love to hear you guys' opinion on that, or you can just head on over to Twitter and tweet it at me as well, and we'll talk about it there. So thanks for watching, guys, and as always, we will see you in the next one. Or the next graphics card video, probably a 1050 Ti, or 1550 Ti? I don't know, whatever.
16,
whatever.
Audio check.
I don't want tax docs today. I'm happy today. Editor's note. So cover me looking at my phone with B-roll. That way I seem smart.